This offseason is going to be critical for Justin Fields, and making that year two jump starts with taking the right steps in the spring and summer leading up to the season.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. On the show today, we look at what the offseason needs to hold, should hold, hopefully can hold for Justin Fields. What the young Bears quarterback needs to do in terms of his personal development, his development within the team, and kind of getting everything queued up for that year two jump, right? You want to avoid the sophomore slump, have the sophomore jump. I don't know if that's a term, but I'm going to make it up and use it now. And we'll kind of go through, okay, what are the different steps? Some things easier said than done. Some things more obvious than others. Not everything in the same order. Not everything, easy to do and guaranteed to achieve success, but it's some of the sort of foundational pieces that you put in the work now, and then you start to see the results more and more in the regular season and maybe beyond the regular season. Maybe not this year, but in the future as this pivotal sort of moment in Justin Fields' career. Because right now he's at that stage, right, where this is his first full offseason, not only as just an NFL quarterback, as an NFL player, but certainly then as the Chicago Bears starting quarterback. And that's one of the things that sometimes can get overlooked in general with rookies in year one compared to year two, is that when they're joining the team, when the draft comes, they're missing out on that entire offseason beforehand to have the playbook, to know your teammates, to have film from the previous season to watch of yourself on that team with those teammates, and hopefully in that same offensive system. Turns out that he won't have that specifically, but still a lot of value he can get from the previous years of film in Chicago. And he's not coming in as a 21-year-old kid or however he was coming out of Ohio State, just trying to learn a new city, find a place to live, get around Hallis Hall, get to know these veterans that have been on the roster, and get to know this coaching staff and all these things, this big rush of new players, new location, new team, new everything right away in your career can be a lot to catch up on quickly. And there's that big learning curve. And it's why so often, it's part of why it's often harder for younger players to have bigger impacts right away early in their careers. But Justin Fields now in year two knows all this organization. Well, the faces have changed, but knows the building, knows the area, has a place to live, gets his playbook earlier, right? Instead of getting it after the draft. Didn't get it right away, January 1st, but as soon as the Luke Getsy hire is made and they start to get the playbook and the system in place, right, he can get his hands on at least some of the concepts and the ideas and the terminology, right? The playbook they're going to use week one is not put together. The idea of it's not just like a book of plays, right? When you talk about like game plan, scheme, moment-to-moment stuff, it's not just like here's the 3-ring binder, or I guess nowadays it's the iPad, but here's the iPad folder with all of the quote-unquote plays in it. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but he still gets his hands on what the system is going to be, what the terminology is going to be, and some of the key things he needs to know months earlier than he got it last offseason. Not to mention that now he comes in as the clear and unquestioned starter at the quarterback position and really can take full command of the offense and work fully with his teammates and not having to split time, or in some cases just not get time with the starting wide receivers, offensive linemen, tight ends, and running backs that he was dealing with last season, so that when he finally went into the lineup, he hadn't been consistently practicing with Allen Robinson all season. So it wasn't a huge surprise then that they weren't consistently on the same page for a lot of last season. Now, he's the guy. He knows who his receivers are going to be. He's getting all the first team reps. There's no question about it, and this is his time to really settle into that, have that full off season as a part of this organization, and really get comfortable with it. There are changes, that he has to adjust to, and there is going to be a learning curve. And it's not like he doesn't have quite that continuity, but at least he's getting an earlier start at the new things than he did coming out as a rookie, and that all rookies do when you get drafted at the end of April, as opposed to getting that information in January and February and getting those extra months to work out with your receivers, for example. Right? That's something we've seen Justin Fields already doing. Video footage of him throwing to Darnell Mooney and other receivers. I believe he was also even working out with Colin Kaepernick in Georgia and other quarterbacks and getting some of that other information and working on the routes and the timing and all the different things that it's bonus work. No player is required to do that. It's not in their contract. It's just him valuing his performance, his team, his teammates, and wanting to do everything within his power to be the best quarterback that he can be. And the more time you can get those throws into, even if it's just Darnell Mooney or whatever receivers end up being part of those things, every throw, every rep helps you learn a little bit more of that muscle memory of, okay, how long does it take Darnell Mooney to run a 10-yard out route compared to maybe another receiver? How much anticipation do I need? How much do I need to lead him with the football at 10 yards versus 15 yards? And how long does that take? How quickly do I have to release the ball? Where in my drop back do I know I have to hitch and throw at this exact time to put it where Darnell Mooney's speed will get to it, compared to, say, Allen Robinson last year or Byron Pringle this upcoming season? You learn each receiver's slight variations in how they run routes and what kind of acceleration they have in and out of their breaks. And the earlier you can get that squared away with Darnell Mooney, then you can spend more time doing it with Byron Pringle or Equanimous St. Brown or other new receivers later on in the process. And it's all part of this getting up to speed quicker, sooner, earlier, to then reduce some of the learning curve and be more closer to 100% ready to roll and firing on all cylinders by week one. It's just a small part, I think, of this self-improvement process for Justin Fields. We'll look back over some of the things we saw from him last season that could use improvement, whether they were his fault or not, but things he can work on a little bit more to just become a little bit better here and there. Next on Locked On Bears. Even though the college basketball tournament is over, the sports betting fund doesn't have to end because baseball season's right around the corner. Professional basketball is right up. The playoffs are just coming in a couple weeks here. And plus all the other sports. Our friends at BetOnline.net are going to be your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information, even football. It's not too late. You can bet on the NFL draft, prop bets on who's going to be the first overall pick, how many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round, over under on how many wide receivers are going to go, what schools are going to have the most players drafted in the first round. There are so many different ways to put a little money on the NFL draft and use your draft knowledge to your advantage. You can find all the latest developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, plus reviews and news for all the different sports leagues this season at betonline.net. It's your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores, even your favorite Vegas casino games online. BetOnline is the place to be. Head on over to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action you need to know. BetOnline, where the game starts. I think Justin Fields' offseason should first and foremost start with just recovering the body from the hits and the injuries that he suffered during last season. Clearly, at times he was playing through some significant pain, the rib injury in there and some of the hits that he took. Just getting that to 100% and taking it easy, I would assume by now has probably been taken care of, but really having your physical body in the best shape possible at this stage of his career can go a long way toward extending the length of his career. Because you'd be surprised, the NFL players have talked about how, like as they become older and deeper in their career, they talk about how they wish they had been even more strict about nutrition and dieting and exercise and stuff like earlier in their careers. Because when they're 22, 23, 25 years old, I mean, they're in the best, they feel like they're in the best shape of their life. They feel young, they feel invincible, and they feel like, I don't have to be as strict on everything compared to when they're 35 and 40. And I'm sure any of you who have reached that age know how much harder it is to be in tip-top shape at 35 and 40 and how much more work that takes compared to when you're younger, and just how, like Tom Brady has talked about how important it has been for him to take such immense care of his body. Or like LeBron James spends like literally millions of dollars a year just on all the physical therapy, cryogenic stuff, dietary stuff. I mean, all the stuff that's way above my pay grade. I mean, I don't understand how it all works, but to really, truly prioritize every single aspect of your physical and mental health for Justin Fields will go a long way towards establishing those things now, even though he's not out of shape. I mean, he has a six-pack. He's a freak athlete as is, but that's all the reason to keep being strict about it and pushing it as much as you can within the healthiest range. That also means not overdoing it, right? Not overworking or over pushing yourself, knowing when to relax and when to rest and how to maximize every single part of your entire physical being to be the best quarterback possible. That's sort of like the overarching, like, first and foremost stuff. But then from there, right? Priority number one, well, I don't know how to rank the priorities here, but like high priority, learn the playbook as much as you can. Like I said, it's not like a physical playbook so much, but learn the concepts, learn the schemes, learn the basics, the fundamentals, dive into as much information as Luke Getsy will give you. Because throughout the offseason, they're very limited in exactly how much time coaches get to directly work with the players on, practicing and running through plays and stuff, right? The offseason program just began for the Chicago Bears, but it's almost exclusively just workouts, right? They're all in the gym working out together, and they're all in the same room and stuff. And of course, I think they can kind of, they can talk about stuff, I guess, but they can't actually like get out and do it and physically coach them. But still, this is the time to like dive into that playbook and really absorb as much of that information as you can and master as much as is currently available to him at this stage of the offensive building process. Then from there, of course, you also want to keep learning the receivers. He's been working out with Darnell Mooney. I don't know the full extent of who all he's been working out with, whether or not Byron Pringle and Equanimeous St. Brown have been in the area yet, or what the process is for them getting to be a part of this building. But the more he can throw to them, even if it's just outside of the team practice structure, because you don't really get that until, voluntary mini camps and then OTAs and the rest of the offseason. But you can throw to him on your own in a private workout as much as you darn want. And it's been great to see Fields really be proactive about that at this stage of his career and at this stage of the offseason. More of that. Keep kind of getting on the same page with those wide receivers, because then I think you can start to speed up a little bit more of the mental side. You don't have to think as much about who the receiver is and how you're supposed to throw it based on that route that the receiver is working on, but really sort of getting through reads and progressions faster. And that's really going to be that combination of knowing the playbook, knowing the receiver, and knowing the coverage, right? Knowing, okay, on this play, I'm reading this route first. If that's not open, I go to my second route. If that's not open, I go to my third route. If that's not open, maybe the fourth one, or go back to the first one, or maybe you scramble at that point, and knowing how long you should take on each route before you decide to go to the next one, what the indicators might be, because some routes take a little bit longer to develop, and just because it might look slightly covered now, based on if the receiver is going to break a certain direction and they're in zone coverage, will he be breaking into an open area in the zone coverage, even if he looks covered right now? Or if it's man-to-man, do I think my receiver will shake free when he makes his break and the move he puts on the defensive back? Or does he look locked down in that man coverage? And being able to kind of go through those things quickly. And a lot of that, I think, is going to come down to film study and just looking at, okay, how has Aaron Rodgers run those plays? And if Justin Fields in the Matt Nagy offense last season ran similar plays or similar concepts that might carry over, how he went through those and what he can see based on those situations. Did he make the right decision? Could he do it differently? How should he think about going through those reads, and how certainly that might vary a little bit from what he was coached to do last season. But it's really about trying to get through those things more quickly when you know that the offensive line protection, as he saw last season, wasn't always going to be as stellar as it needed to be for him. Because then you could also talk about wanting to speed up some of the delivery and the release, right? It's not just physically, or it's not just like mentally seeing it and knowing where to go with it, but then also trying to quicken up from the time you decide to throw the ball to the time the ball actually leaves your hand, how quickly that process goes. And that can be kind of a tricky thing in terms of like, you don't want to like reinvent the wheel and take away his confidence as a thrower, right? It's just about trying to speed it up a little bit and making sure that the arm mechanics and where the ball comes from holding it together in front of his chest to bringing the ball back to cocking it to loading up the arm and actually, delivering it through the shoulder and the core. And I'm by no means a quarterback mechanics expert. And I know there was like iPhone video footage of Justin Fields throwing to his receivers that everyone was breaking down like frame by frame to see where the ball was when he's pulling his arm back. And is he dropping it a little bit less? Is it a little bit of a tighter snap of a release? And I don't know, man. I get like iPhone, sort of blurry iPhone footage from a distance of him throwing on air in a practice field at a high school in Georgia or wherever it was. Like, I don't know that we're going to glean these really applicable conclusions about progress Justin Fields has made in March and April, but it's good that he's working out. It's good that he seems to be working on a lot of the right things. His personal quarterback trainer has kind of said these are the things he is looking to work on quite a bit and the things they've been working on individually. The question is how well that translates in a game when the live bullets are flying and it's not just in shorts against air at a high school practice, but very different when actual pass rushers, actual offensive line, actual defense, actual coverage, actual stakes. Each and every time can be a different ballgame, but that's why you practice it in this environment and then try to apply that to the more difficult environment. But I think there's more too, that it's not just the clear, obvious, like on-field X's and O's type of evaluation for Fields, but even some of the more, not necessarily off the field stuff, but some of the more difficult things that aren't just throwing the ball that we could see Fields stand to work on a little bit and just try and improve his game in every way that he can. We'll look at some of the other ways that Fields can grow really into this role as the unquestioned quarterback starter leader of this Bears team next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at rockauto.com. They're a family business that have been serving auto parts customers for over 20 years. Their online catalog of auto parts is the deepest you can find anywhere. I mean, they have all sorts of stuff. I'm not a car expert by any means. I don't know what a fuel pump assembly or an engine control module quite does. I couldn't install it myself, but I do know that you can get them at rockauto.com. That no matter what you're looking for, they have almost everything, and it's super easy to find what you're looking for too. Like even with all the different parts, you could get lost, but no, all you do is enter in your car's make and model, and then you can quickly sort between the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer for any of the different parts that you might be looking for. And those prices are particularly important because a lot of the chain part stores will have a different price tier. It'll be cheaper if you're a professional mechanic. They'll give you a special deal versus a do-it-yourselfer like us that's paying more of a higher price. But rockauto.com's prices are the same for everybody. So don't spend up to twice as much for the same part somewhere else. Head on over to rockauto.com today and see all the parts available for your car or truck. When you check out, fill out the box that says, "How did you hear about us?" and write in the words "Locked On." That way they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. As Justin Fields steps up into this bigger role and really takes over the mantle in Chicago, I think there's a lot we can see from him growing, as a leader and taking over sort of the forefront of this organization, being truly that face of the franchise. Because ready or not, it's him now. It's all Justin Fields. Last year, we kind of got glimpses of it, and he was kind of poking out from behind the Andy Dalton stuff and trying to just find his way and establish his voice where he could, but there wasn't really that, organizational. I mean, he had organizational backing in general, but, there were some constraints in terms of, the dynamics of that offense, the quarterback room, and the coaching staff, and all those different things. But, now, it's Justin Fields' turn to be that voice and to be that leader in the locker room. Even at age 20, is he 23 right now? It's a lot for him to go in there and talk to guys, 10 years plus older than him that have been doing this for a long time. But for him to say, you know what, I'm the guy where I'm stepping up, I'm going to do it. And he's always been more of a lead by action than words guy. But I mean, he's not vocal though either, right? He's just a little bit more reserved, right? We're not talking like Jay Cutler level stuff, but just he's not the energetic, at least publicly, outwardly flashy in your face, talking smooth type guy, but he's more of the subtle kind of like do my job. And when I do speak, you listen because it carries a little bit more weight because he's not just constantly talking your ear off about any other thing. But I think there's a real opportunity for him to step up in that role that the players that were here last season saw glimpses of it, right? And could see those moments. And now they can they sort of has established some of that, cachet, some of that credibility there from the moments that they saw last season. But even for the new guys coming in, right, they can see him grow and step up into that role. And I'd also like to see how well he grows and steps up in terms of like asserting himself with the coaching staff and the game plan. Because that was something with Mitch Trubisky and Matt Nagy that we weren't super sure about. And it kind of came out like later in his career that he seemed to be stepping up and having more input. Like, second, third, maybe I think it was more like the third season of his career. Maybe it was the fourth, where he was really submitting more actual input on game plans and routes and things that he liked to see, and kind of feeling more comfortable to push back on his coaching staff a little bit and say, hey, you know what, I don't think this is working, or I think this might work better. And that can be hard for, especially with the coach dynamic. It's one thing when like you're the quarterback in the locker room, so everyone kind of knows you're supposed to be the leader, but like the coach usurps the quarterback, and especially as a 23-year-old, and this coach, at least under Nagy, it was like he's the quote-unquote quarterback guru from the Andy Reid offense. He's the offensive quote-unquote genius, right? You're not going to question him. And even, for like Luke Getsy, it's like, well, he worked with Aaron Rodgers and ran that Matt LaFleur offense. Like, you're not going to question him, right? But I think Justin Fields, as a modern NFL quarterback with some talent, has some position to say, hey, you know what? I think we should do things differently. And I want him to have that confidence and that comfort to assert himself, right? It's not a disrespectful thing. You're not trashing the coach or anything like that, but being able to speak your piece and have your input and make sure that they are putting you in the best position to be successful, and not just taking their word for it because you are because they are the coach and they know what's best. You can have some input in that situation. And it seems like, it's easier for a veteran quarterback who's been in the league for 10 years to say that, and maybe but a Field should feel comfortable doing so if he's going to be that face of the franchise and that guy. Not that he knows better than the coaching staff, but he may know some things better about himself and what works for him and what he's more comfortable with. And having that be a part of the conversation and the game planning process is important. And I think it's something he can step into more and more. He's not just the rookie backup quarterback anymore. He's the guy and the face of the franchise. I'm curious if there's going to be much that he has to not unlearn from the Matt Nagy era, but sort of adjust, right? In the sense that like the previous coaching staff may have wanted him to handle certain things certain ways. Oh, like when we see this route versus this coverage, we want you to throw it here, or we might want you to aim the ball to the backside of the receiver versus the front. Like little things like that. I think especially when it comes to how Nagy was trying to shoehorn Fields into so many of those like 3-step drop curl routes. And oftentimes, too, on some of those quicker plays, it would feel like sometimes Fields was a little bit quick. If it wasn't there, scramble. And I wondered how much of that was Fields being a rookie who just knows he's got to make a play and get out of the pocket, and the common sort of like rookies tend to be a little bit too quick on the scramble and give up on plays passing a little bit too early if they have that mobility. And how much of that was maybe the coaching staff saying like, hey, man, if it's not here, run. And I wonder if Luke Getsy and the new offensive coaching staff might have a different philosophy, a different approach, different instructions, right? So that's why it's not like necessarily like Matt Nagy was teaching him bad things and bad habits that he needs to unlearn, but more like Luke Getsy and company might have different ways for him to do some of these things, and he'll have to learn more the way this coaching staff would like to do it, and to that extent, unlearn some of the ways that the previous coaching staff asked him to do it. And I'm wondering how many of those things there will be. I mean, we just won't know on the outside, but I bet there's going to be a few things like that he's going to have to sort of transition beyond just the obvious, like, terminology, and the play calls are going to be different, and the receivers are going to be different, but like the little things that maybe the Nagy coaching staff was pushing or emphasizing with him that the new coaching staff might not. That's another process of this offseason of learning your coaches along with your receivers and your plays, because those feel like the things that you can actually do a little bit more in the offseason, whereas like some of the things like pocket presence, for example, you know, where again, like sometimes he was a little too quick to flee the pocket, or sometimes he didn't feel pressure accurately. Like he'd either feel the pressure too soon and leave the pocket too early, or sometimes he'd hold on to the ball too long. It's really hard to replicate that, especially even when you're not practicing with any teammates. Like at OTAs, you can kind of replicate that, but just working out on your own or throwing to wide receivers, you can't truly replicate pocket presence. And I don't know how much he can do there besides like film study, watching himself and remembering like, okay, when I fled the pocket there, what did I feel physically? And was my feeling correct? Or how do I know what I'm supposed to feel when I'm supposed to flee the pocket, and really kind of go back through and figure out when he was right, when he was wrong, and associate those feelings and those memories with what he actually did and what he was supposed to have done on some of those plays. I fully trust that Justin Fields is the type of player that knows to do that, knows to do all these things, right? I'm not here to tell Justin Fields what to do or think I know what's better for Fields than he does. It's just more of getting us a sense of like, okay, here's what kind of things your quarterback is and should be and most likely will be working on throughout this offseason to get ready for that potential year 2 jump. Certainly we'll keep an eye on whatever the Bears keep doing to try and build around him. They had a workout with DeAndre Carter yesterday, the wide receiver kick returner who had been with the Bears. Any other free agent signings we'll keep you up to date on. Plus, we'll get you ready for the NFL draft, start to dive into these prospects a little bit more and some of the different dynamics in this year's draft classes. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, and hopefully your first listen every day. If you're looking for your second listen, Locked On NFL Draft Podcast is getting you ready for none other than the NFL Draft. If you want to get a head start on some of those prospects and mock draft Mondays and all the good stuff over there, Ryan Tracy and Chris and Eric Crocker do a great job over there with the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, because we are your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I hope that listening to the Locked On Bears podcast makes it just a little bit easier for you to bear down.